Morning. Can you hear me? You know, I was going to do a phone call from God this morning, and I was going to pretend that he was telling me to say good things about you, Gene, but not now. Well, if you attended my Wednesday night class a couple weeks ago, you're dismissed. You can leave. You've already... Yeah, Leola was there. No, you might as well sit through it again, Leola. So we're coming to a close on the subject of... well, just to put it in my own words, what has Jesus done for me to change my life? And I thought a lot about that. You know, I mean, there's just so many things that he's done that I was kind of at a loss on what to come up with for... Is this thing on? Yep. Okay. I was kind of at a loss as to what to come up with for this subject. And then I thought, you know, it's always best to talk a little bit more about things you know than about things you don't know. And the Army, we know rules. It's just what we do. We follow orders. We're given orders. We carry out those orders. We like guidelines and orders because it gives us direction. Well, I think generally as a society, and I know there's always the rule breakers out there, Gene Warren, but I think generally as a society, we like to follow rules. We like to know what the guidelines are. We like to know how we're supposed to live, how we're supposed to act towards each other. So just what are the rules? John 15:10 through 11. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments. Who's talking here? Who else do we know in the New Testament that says my Father? Jesus. Just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I've told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. He's talking about the joy that we get from following commandments, following rules. Now, does that sound like a fun thing to do, follow a bunch of rules? Zeb, do the kids in your school love to follow the rules?
No.
So just as a society, we've got a lot of rule breakers. I mean, the police are busy constantly chasing down the rule breakers. So how are we to get joy from rules? Don't rules limit us? Psalms 119, verse 143. As pressure and stress bear down on me, I find joy in your commands. David knew that being obedient to God was the key to maintaining joy. Psalms 51 and 12. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and make me willing to obey you. Living and following the rules laid out by God brings us joy. But what are the rules? I mean, we know about the Ten Commandments, right? Most of us can recite most of them. Well, your homework for today is to memorize that handout that was in the bulletin. And you will be tested in a couple of weeks. You have to remember the command. You have to remember where it's found. All 49. Thank goodness that's not really true. But what those are, and it's Barb's fault that you have them in the handout. She wanted to make sure you had the rules, right, Barb? It's easy to understand how the Pharisees came up with so many rules on their own. People like definition. People want hard and fast rules. This way, now listen closely, this way we can excuse ourselves when it comes to the gray areas because it wasn't covered in the rules, right? I'm fairly certain Jesus knew of our tendencies. Wouldn't it be nice if Jesus had just given us a rule book? Oh wait, Barb gave you Jesus' rule book. Do you know that there are 49 rules? Yes, you do, because you've got that paper in front of you. Jesus gave us these so that we would know how he wants us to govern our lives, how to interact with others, how we as Christians are to behave. Instead of 10 commandments, he gave us 49 that I printed up. There might even be more in there. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. The Jewish leaders had over 600 rules. Well, I don't count their rules. Those were just man's lame attempt to play God. Not only did Jesus give us more rules than the Ten Commandments, he made it tougher on us. Because now it isn't just about checking the box, as the Israelites mistakenly thought it was. For example, now, if one only lusts after another in their heart, they are guilty of adultery. All you have to do is have lustful thoughts. And it's the same as physically committing adultery. That's pretty harsh, Jesus. Why are you so hard on us? Well, Jesus knows that we have a heart problem. And he made it clear to us that sin is still sin, even if it only occurs in our heart. Well, that seems pretty tough, doesn't it? But it really isn't. God has always expected this from his people, but as humans prone to mess up, prone to sin, we often fool ourselves into thinking, well, I didn't actually stick my hand in the cookie jar, so it doesn't count. Wrong. It's a hard issue. It has always been a hard issue. From the first human sin, pride, we have made excuses for our behavior. Eve said to God, the devil made me do it. Adam said to God, Eve made me do it. Adam even went further and insinuated it was God's fault for giving him Eve in the first place. Well, we have a saying in the Army about excuses. Now, I'm cleaning this up just a little bit, so don't worry. They're like armpits. Everyone has them, and they stink. We learned quickly never to get out, never to give our sergeants excuses. Jesus, in his teaching, left us no excuse. And now we have no excuse. You have all of Jesus' rules right in front of you. Anybody don't have that? We've got stuff out in the foyer. Mr. Bowman will run and grab it for you. Anybody hold your hand up if you don't have a copy of Jesus' rules. Okay. None of you will ever be able to stand in front of God and say, I didn't know what was expected of me. God's here right now. And he knows you have the list. He knows that Monty gave it to you. So you can't get out of this. The commands of Jesus deal almost entirely with our heart. If our heart's right, we'll want to serve him. And that's where the joy comes from. If our heart is right, we will find generosity and compassion. Now listen to this. We will find generosity and compassion a natural part of our very being. If our heart's right. If our heart is right, we wouldn't dream of cheating on our mate or being dishonest with friends and coworkers. If our hearts are right, we won't long to remain in this world, this broken world. But we'll yearn to live with God in his very presence. If our hearts are right, we won't look upon troubles and trials with sorrowful depression, but with joy at knowing God is aware and will work everything out to his glory. When is God's help the most faith-building? When everything's going okay for me? When things seem completely hopeless, that's when his help is the most faith-building. Think of your troubles, and I know everybody out there's got some. Think of your troubles as Elijah dumping more water on the wood. Here's a little backstory. Elijah proposes a direct test of the powers of Baal and of Jehovah God. The people of Israel, 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, are summoned to Mount Carmel. An altar is built for Baal. Wood's laid on the altar. An ox is slaughtered and cut into pieces. The pieces are laid on the wood. Elijah built an altar too. Whoever can call down fire to consume the sacrifice, they are truly God. Elijah decides to make it really hard. 1 Kings 18:33 and 34. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water, pour it on the offering and on the wood. Do it again," he said, and they did it again. "Do it a third time," he ordered, and they did it a third time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. Do you think for 1 second God looked down on that and thought, "Oh, wow, this is going to be really hard for me. This is going to be tough. I don't know if I can do this"? Of course not. But I'll tell you what dumping the water on the wood will do. It increases God's glory. More troubles in your life, problems heaping themselves upon each other, is just more glory for God when he fixes your problems. And he does fix your problems. Please don't bother telling me God abandoned you and left you in a mess. That's just a human perception. God works things out to his glory, not to yours. I spend a lot of time on this particular subject as a reminder to myself. When I want to start crying, woe is me. You see, if I'm not careful, I become my favorite subject. My troubles, my problems, me, me, me. It's easy to throw pity parties for ourselves. Trust me, I'm an expert. I find it a lot harder, though, to worry about my problems when I'm busy helping someone else out with their problems. Suddenly, my problems don't seem quite so large, and my heart becomes more like Jesus wants it to be. If our hearts are right, we will love God with every fiber of our being, if our hearts are right. The you really want to know how Jesus has changed you? Take a hard look at his commands and ask yourself what you would have thought of them before you learned to love. It isn't hard to see how he's changed us. If we're learning from him, we are loving God and loving our neighbor. How has Jesus changed me? 1 Peter 3:18. Christ suffered for our sins once for all time. He never sinned, but he died for sinners to bring you safely home to God. He suffered physical death, but he was raised to life in the Spirit. This verse is packed with so much stuff, it's mind-boggling. Let's unpack a little bit of it. Christ suffered once for everyone. Everyone means everyone that has ever lived before or ever will live in the future. Christ is perfection. We are not. We're the exact opposite. Spoiled, ruined, and broken. Christ died in our place for our salvation, not for his. Christ beat death, showing us that we have nothing to fear. And that's a huge one right there. Because what's everybody so afraid of with the coronavirus? Oh no, I might die. Well, this is true. You might. You might walk outside tomorrow and a meteorite falls out of the sky and lands right on your head. You still might die. But if your heart's right with God, if you understand what Jesus has done for you, you won't care about this life anymore. Because this life is not important. Your only one task you have in this life is to teach others about Jesus. It isn't to go play and have fun and do all the sorts of things that you love. No. You have one mission. And that's to share Jesus with others. So stop loving this life. And quit worrying about death. Because death is nothing more than a doorway for Christians into where Jesus is, the realm of heaven. Christ beat death. He showed us that. We have nothing to fear. Nothing. Someone walks up, puts a gun to your head, says, I dare you to say you're a Christian. First words out of your mouth ought to be, I'm a Christian, because you don't care. Christ is life in the Spirit. It's really amazing what Jesus has done for us. We have a hard time sometimes wrapping our heads around it because we can never really see ourselves coming anywhere close to having the same love for other people. Some of who we consider completely worthless. Now, I want you to listen to that because everybody in here is not Jesus. And while some may be more guilty than others, we all have certain people that we think in our minds, man, they're kind of worthless. Just the way they behave, the way they act, what they've done to you. But can you think of anyone that Jesus would say, that soul is not worth me dying for? I can't think of anyone. That's the type of love that we need to try to have. How has Jesus changed me? He fixed my heart issue and taught me to love. If your heart isn't right with God, then it's high time you quit putting this off and did something about it. God isn't going to drag you down here and toss you into the baptistry. Now, a few of us might. But God's not going to do it. He doesn't work that way. You have to decide you need him. And trust me, you do. If you haven't given your life to Christ, then there's no better time than right now. Because, and I know that people might say, well, that's cliche for you to say. We're not promised tomorrow. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gene, but isn't that a verse in the Bible? No man is promised tomorrow. Maybe I'm thinking of something else. But really, we're not. We're not promised tomorrow. We all think we're going to get out of bed tomorrow, right? And go do our work or whatever. Well, you might just be surprised. Because God might come tonight. We don't know. But why would you want to put it off? Why would you want to take that chance? If you're not right with Him, there's no better time than right now. If you need Jesus in your life, or if you need prayers, come